Welcome back to another true crime episode. We're gonna be looking at the Maggie Long case again. I know we discussed about going over the what looks to be muddy or soot-covered footsteps, and that's an interesting thing. But I've been really starting to go over that whole Missouri case. Now, I'm not saying this is what I'm sold on, 100% or anything. There's some very, very peculiar things going on with that. Especially a lot of the things that they've got going on there. There's some things that do line up, but there's also a lot that is not being shown about that case. Essentially, that was looked at a cut and dry, and nobody's really FOIA requested anything I could see, at least on that case. So some of the details need to be clarified before I can fully really get on board with it. But I do see where these descriptions kind of match. I do see where some of these things go on, except it's two people. There's three sketches. Now, could it just really be two people and not three? It's possible, right? But there's a lot that we'd have to look at and really break down to really start to connect that one. But that's not what we're going to be really talking about pretty heavily tonight. Tonight's, in fact, going to be somewhat of a shorter show because there's a topic I really want to go and focus on because it needs to be, and that itself is the fire. I have yet to see a whole lot of people really discussing the fire as a whole. But it is a little interesting because when it comes down to it, end of the day, we've got some photos. We got 4 photos from the home. They don't show off the garage. Now, to me, that screams there's an issue here because the garage was an area where apparently there was fire. I guess there was fire all over the house. Now, that being said, that would say there's got to be some oxygen flow. Right, pretty heavy amount of oxygen flow going on there. Not to mention the fire department was actually just pulling up at 7:31. Now, everything was reported at around 7:01 or so. That's when dispatch got the details from the person living on the property. Not the actual owners, but the person who was living in the apartment, if you will. But they reported hearing some violence going on downstairs and that the owners themselves, actual residents of the home, were not violent. Now, if we were to go and start looking around the crime scene we're given, like I said, we're only given limited clues, and we were able to break it down this last time. We have the order. Okay? We have the exact order of what's going on with this case here. So let's show you that real quick. As you can see, my crude handwriting with a mouse, you can see the order of what I believe actually occurred. You see this very first image here. There's not a great deal of fire damage, which means this is probably happening toward the back of the home, I would guess. This is where I believe Maggie was in her room, or at least this is where she was led to at first. Now, I'm not exactly sure of everything that transpired here. Not everything. There's quite a bit we can already kind of guess and things like that, but end of the day, we don't really know every single thing that actually occurred in that bedroom. We don't know. We don't know how long they were in the home. We know that she would have been there probably about 4 o'clock or so. 4:30 is when she would have arrived home. That's 2 hours, 2.5 hours-ish, before the actual, the other residents, or the person living above them, in the little above the upstairs apartment, they had reported the call, or they had called the dispatch and were like, hey, look, there's some violence going on here, and these people aren't typically violent, so can you guys come out here and check it out? Kind of like a welfare check, if you will. And that's when things escalated. And then I believe it was also called in as a fire shortly after that. I'd have to go back over the records again, but this is what we're seeing here. Okay, and we know that these photos were taken during the day. So this is probably the following day or the day after that. They came in, they took their photos and all this. So we could technically chalk a lot of this up to the footprints from fire department, from the police department. We could chalk these up. A lot of it we could. And especially all things considered, you start looking at the direction where they're going. It does meet that a little bit easier than it would be just somebody rushing in the house and doing all this. Why would there be so much mud? Well, I already looked around. The area wasn't wet. It was cold, but it wasn't like humid or anything. It was just cold. Okay. Now we know there was some snow on the ground. Okay, as you can see from the above photo, that was taken shortly after. This is from a news report, or from a news helicopter, if I'm not mistaken, and they had taken these photos. But this is shortly after all that had transpired. So it's fair to assume snow was probably on the ground around the same time, but just to be on the safe side, we do know the weather itself. It was just cold, didn't appear to be wet. So fire department comes in, they're going to be hitting this hard with water. Okay, so that's basically what we're going to get from this. And I know this is kind of like no-brainer kind of stuff. It's like, oh, okay, well, no kidding me, right? You know, this is no-brainer stuff here. But that would explain why there looks to be mud tracked throughout the house. Some of this stuff does look like soot, that type of material. Hey, how's it going, Rick? It does appear that there was, ash residue and all this, but it does appear there's also some like dirt and mud tracked in here. So, but if we were to go and really start looking at picture 2, that's obviously where the fire started. You can see because the V pattern, the upside down V pattern. It's more like a U, but you can also see other things. If you were to go and get a closer look at it, you can see there's some weird pattern on there. That would be from the clothes. That's just something typically you'll find. If there's somebody wearing clothes, things like this, it's going to adjust the heat, especially if there's pressure. It could adjust the what kind of damage that the soot's actually going to go and get on there, if you will. So it's kind of a telltale sign that somebody is being burned alive. Essentially, is how that breaks down. So now we know that this is where the fire started. Then we have to go and take a look at, well, where did she go? Now, if we look at this Missouri case, this is where that connection is. The victim was bound. Now, she had a safe with a shotgun, I believe it was, in the Missouri case, and basically she refused to go and give out the safe code, right? So they basically threatened her, and she still wasn't budging on it, so they doused her with gasoline and lit her on fire. Okay. Well, we can't really tell if she was bound here. In fact, it would be a lot easier to say that she wasn't. All right, well, let's do that then. All right, so basically this case occurred. This is the Maggie Long case. Maggie Long was 17 years old back in December 1st, 2017, when she had left school at approximately 3:35, if I'm not mistaken, or 4 o'clock. And she lived right down the street, but allegedly a lot of people seem to think that it would take about 30 minutes for her to get home or so. So about 4:30 or so, 4:05, 4:35 or so is when she got home, is when people believe. And she just went back home to go and get some refreshments for the play, just to kind of stock up a little bit. And, well, she didn't ever return. And there was also a fire reported at her home. And then at about 9:36, 9:34, something like that, her Maggie Long's sister, Lina Long, who was also previously there was a shooting at her school, the same school that Maggie was going to. A few years prior, I think it was '06, I believe it was. And she was one of the hostages left there, and, well, that all occurred. But, to get back on track, so her sister reported her missing, because nobody knew where she was. Came out a few days later, she was the victim in the home. After we got a hold of dispatch and all this, after we got the details about that, it is confirmed that they knew that night there was a body in the home. They just didn't know who it was. But what ended up happening was she was burned alive, which also goes along with the same kind of thing that happened in Missouri in 2018 between Vincent Rist and Antonio. What was it? I forgot his last name. But these two guys had robbed this home. Oh, and it's all good. It's all good. And so basically, what ended up happening was these two guys robbed this lady's home, and she refused to give up the details of the safe information, which they basically just said, "Okay, fine, we're gonna take the safe." And they took the safe, and they doused her in gasoline and burned her alive. Now, this woman happened to survive. Maggie, however, we're not exactly sure at the accelerant. Now, I do think it's a fair assumption, gasoline, but I'd want to go and looking at the wall and stuff, I feel like there would be a little more splash, unless she was doused prior. But even then, with the heat and stuff like this, I mean, you got radiation, things like this that could have easily set that gasoline on fire, so it would have had to have not tracked in certain areas. So I think it's safe to say she was probably doused in something right there against the wall. And it could have just been something like lighter fluid. So it could have been something they just had in there. Yeah. And so that happened, and they're thinking it's probably around 7 o'clock or so when this all started to occur. But when they ended up taking is she also had a safe in the house. Now, it's assumed it was probably the father's safe, but it had an AK-47, and it also had a Beretta 9mm handgun, plus 2,000 rounds of ammunition, and some jade figurines inside this green safe. I already got the exact weight of the safe itself. You add an extra weight of the guns and the ammo and everything else. I mean, you're looking close to about 200 pounds or so. The weight itself of just the safe is about 162, 163 pounds. But two guys, is all it really would be necessary to go and take it out on average. We're not looking at some superhuman strength or anything here. We're not looking at some bodybuilder. We're looking at it looks like some young kids. But this does kind of match it, except, see, here's the thing. When it came down to the 2018 case, the lady was bound and gagged and all that. We have no proof. We have nothing to really show. Was she bound and gagged? And even then, when I looked up that case, I'm still trying to find information on if the lady was bound and gagged to the wall. How is she bound and gagged? We know there was like duct tape and things like this, but she was able to go and escape, and she had first, second, and third degree burns all over her body. But Maggie didn't survive, and we know that the fire department got there within about 30 minutes. So we're looking at Maggie probably died pretty quick. Her brain probably kicked in and shut everything down, and she died. If I had to guess, especially since it looked to be a pretty decent amount of oxygen flowing through the house, especially if there's flames just coming out all over and people were responding and seeing this from a distance, mind you. There had to have been some pretty good amount of oxygen flow going on throughout the house. And if that's true, then that would explain her lungs would have been seared. And if her lungs are seared, she's not surviving. Surviving your lungs being seared is pretty much instant death. I don't actually know if it's possible to even survive it, to be honest. But her lungs would have been seared. She wouldn't have lasted very long. Fire would have got too intense, and she would have passed out. She would have shut down super early. So probably within I would say at most a few minutes, her body would have shut down. She would have just plopped, which is where we would see right here in image 3. We see that she ended up falling to the ground over here. This is where she had died, allegedly, is in the kitchen. But I'm also seeing some other reports saying that she might have actually died in the garage. which means she had traveled in a bit more of an of a distance. As you can see right here, this window here on image 3, there's 4 windows they can match, and really only 3 of them it would actually match perfectly, because we know the upstairs is the apartment to the person they had called, which means it leaves the front window there, the one on this little front area here, right the arrow arch I've got right here, and on both sides of those right there. So there's 3 windows. But when it looks on sheer size, that does appear to be that very front window, which means the kitchen's just directly there, which means she probably ran to the garage. I don't know why she would run to the garage, but that's what they're saying. It's very, very sad. But, when it comes down to the end of the day, I want these guys caught. But like I've said before, when it comes down to the fire itself, you look at it, you can see the damage, the soot damage all over the ceiling, and especially in the kitchen. That's where you see the most damage it does appear, is you can see that it's that entire area. So it looks like she had fallen here, which explains the amount of the ash and soot. So if that's true, which I'm pretty sure it is, this is what actually happened. I'm not really buying the whole garage theory. This is where she had died. I believe she died in the kitchen. So if you look at the kitchen, that's severely discolored. You look over here in number 4, that appears to be, from I would say it's towards the back of the house. So there are some theories. I've got one, and I think 2 of the people are actually dead already. That's my current theory. I think there's 3 people from the town. Now, I'm not out there accusing anybody, but they're suspect. Head shape is one thing that you can't really, that's genetic, just to put it bluntly. The skull shape, the bone densities, things like this. There's all sorts of different things that are genetic. But the actual head shape itself is a genetic trait. So that would be something you wouldn't be able to just it would just be anybody could have this head shape. No, you'd have to be related. And I've already found somebody in their home, or not in their home, but in Bailey, that actually the head shape does match perfectly. In fact, the description's very, very eerie, as it looks just like it just popped right out of the sketch. But I'm not going to go and accuse anybody, of course, as that wouldn't be right. But I also believe these 3 people are friends, and I do believe this is planned out. I think that they'd planned on coming to this person's house specifically. But I do believe, from what I've read, there's 2 out of the 3 that would be dead right now. I'm not going to explain the details of it, whether it be homicide or suicide. I'm not going to explain. But that's just my opinion on that. But when it comes to the fire and all this, that's the interesting part, is the picture number 2 right there, which that looks to be towards, if I had to guess, I think that could have been the garage, right, going over there. That makes sense, which means her room could have just been on the other side of the garage, right? That's a possibility, which would explain it. Which explains this, actually. So that, actually, now that I think about it, no, that actually makes perfect sense. Is that going to be the connection point? No, I kind of see it now, actually. Huh. Either way. This is where we know that she had died, right here. We know that picture number 2 is where she was lit on fire. So, how these guys got in the house, either they broke in, which there's no signs of forced entry. See, that's the thing. Their house is gated. It actually has an actual gate right on the front and all this. They did at the time as well, too. So she would have undid that, and they came in with a van, so they had that gate had to have been open. So did Maggie drive, or did she just walk back? To me, I would assume she probably drove, but I don't have the exact details yet. I'm still working these things out. This is a small little one. I could just Google Maps it and be like, okay, well, would it take 30 minutes to walk back? It looks like it would take about 30 minutes. With me walking, at least. But I could be wrong. But she also lived in a rural area, so walking along a country road like that, I wouldn't want to be doing that. But this is what I know for a fact. Her house has got a gate on it. And they came in, we know that people had seen this tan-colored older vehicle. There's two vehicles, actually, we got to see that people gave descriptions of. There's an old pickup, and then there's a van. I do believe the van was the tan-colored one. But there's 3 guys that were supposed to have done this. And I believe that they had come in knowing full well she was going to be there. Knowing there was a safe, which means they had to have been in the house. So this had to have been somebody that knew them, at least knew them a little bit. Or had heard or something. There had to have been some detail there they would have had to have known. But why follow her? Well, it's because they needed somebody to go and be able to open the safe. And I don't think she wanted to. So why else she'd be lit on fire? But then again, if this is somebody close to him, they had to. She would have just told. There's no way around it. And as I say, burn the evidence, right? Well, the same thing with a witness, right? Kind of have to burn them too, right? To get rid of them. Why? Because if these are young guys, which they look to be pretty young, that's probably what happened. They're like thinking, oh crap, well, we're not going to be able to get away with this and get away scot-free. We're going to have to do this. So I think the 2 of the people that have passed now, I believe they were guilty. Like they felt the guilt. I think that had something to do with it to some degree. But that's what I got for you guys tonight. We'll be back this next Wednesday at 9 p.m. And we'll be discussing... I should have a little more clarity on the feet, but I mean, don't get your hopes up yet. It's either going to be on that if I've got the details on it, or we're going to be reviewing an older case. But thank you guys for tuning in, and I will see you guys next time.